This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jonathan Savage, and in the early hours of Thursday the 24th of February, these are our main stories. The Kremlin says pro-Russia separatists in Luhansk and Donetsk have asked for military assistance to repel what they call aggression by the Ukrainian army. Kyiv enacts a state of emergency and tells its 3 million citizens in Russia to leave the country. Meanwhile, a scandal exposed on Chinese social media takes a further turn, and a BBC investigation finds children exposed to grooming and explicit material in parts of the metaverse. Still to come in this podcast, Hong Kong's top health official says COVID restrictions may have to be tightened, plus a volley of abuse and the wrong kind of smash. The tennis player Alexander Zverev is thrown out of the Mexico Open. We begin this podcast in the United States, where the Pentagon has warned that the Russian military is now fully prepared for a large-scale invasion of Ukraine. John Kirby is the Pentagon spokesman.
Without speaking to specific timing, because only Mr. Putin knows what the timing is here, what I would tell you is that we continue to see him form his capabilities in such a way that leads us to believe that we are potentially close to some sort of action. Again, what that action is going to be and exactly on what timeline, we can't be sure. But what we see is that they are ready.
We got more from our correspondent Barbara Pletosher.
The U.S. has been saying for weeks now that an invasion looks imminent. What the Pentagon specifically said today is that Mr. Putin is as ready as he can be to order an invasion if he decides to do so, that he has moved in pretty nearly all the forces that the U.S. military anticipated he would move in, and that 80% of them are in ready positions, so spread out in attack formations within a few kilometers of the borders. So that's the assessment in terms of what they see, what they expected to see if there was going to be a big invasion. But they continue to say, Mr. Putin, they don't know if Mr. Putin will give that order.
Now, Barbara, the US announced more sanctions today against Russia and its interests. Tell us about that and what impact this could have at this stage when, as you say, Russia appears to be as ready as they can be for some sort of invasion.
Well, you're right. I mean, sanctions tend to play out over time, don't they? So the effect of them is usually not immediate. But certainly the United States sees the sanctions on this pipeline, Nord Stream 2, as a real achievement. This is, of course, the pipeline which would deliver Russian gas to Germany. And the Americans have opposed it right from the beginning. They've argued it would increase European dependence on Russian gas, and so it would give Mr. Putin a strategic advantage. And Congress wanted to impose sanctions, but the administration had previously blocked this because it did not want to split with Germany, and Germany strongly supported the pipeline. But now that Germany has shifted its position because of what Mr. Putin is up to and suspended the project, now the administration felt it could go ahead, and what it has done is sanction the company which is building the pipeline. And there's a strong feeling here in Washington that this will be a real blow to the Kremlin over time.
Barbara Pletosher. Well, this follows a day of heightened rhetoric from the Ukrainian president, who has brought in a state of emergency. And in recent hours, the Kremlin has said separatist leaders in the two breakaway republics of eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, have asked Mr. Putin to help them. Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring is following developments.
A short while ago, the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, made an extraordinary late-night statement. He said President Putin had received appeals for help from the two separatist people's republics, which he had recognized as independent states on Monday. According to the Kremlin, they accuse Ukraine of destroying schools, hospitals, kindergartens, and killing peaceful residents, including children. And because of that, they need help from the Kremlin. Now, I have to say that no evidence has been seen from those parts of Ukraine confirming the allegations made by the separatists and apparently supported by the Kremlin.
So justified or not, this must be a fairly significant step, asking Russia to send troops into what is recognised as Ukraine.
Yes, this appears to be yet another piece of political theatre staged by Moscow. That's according to politicians in the West and Ukraine. They say that these statelets were created with Moscow's help, if not by Moscow, then recognized by Moscow as independent statelets. So what happens now is an invitation for Moscow to send in more troops to legitimize this invasion. But the fear is that Russian troops may not stop at those two statelets and progress further into Ukraine and possibly try to capture major Ukrainian cities.
Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. On the international stage in New York, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has appealed to the United Nations General Assembly for support, demanding decisive action against Russia. He gave this warning.
The beginning of a large-scale war in Ukraine will be the end of the world order as we know it. If Russia does not get a severe, swift and decisive response now, this will mean a total bankruptcy of the international security system and international institutions which are tasked with maintaining the global security order. This is a grim scenario which will throw us back to the darkest times of the 20th century. Russia will not stop at Ukraine. If a permanent member of the UN Security Council succeeds in breaking literally all rules, other actors will be inspired by him and follow his pattern.
The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. As I mentioned earlier, a state of emergency is now in place in Ukraine, where hackers have attacked websites and some banks. The government has asked Ukrainians in Russia to leave, saying it can no longer protect them. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford is in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, just outside the breakaway regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, newly recognised as independent by Russia. She told us more about the state of emergency.
First and foremost, it's about sending a signal that things are now serious enough to pass legislation to give the authorities here more powers should they need to use them. I think, at the moment what we're looking at is potentially more sort of powers for vehicle checks and sort of stop checks on documents, that kind of thing, restrictions on mass gatherings for safety reasons as well. So it was a law that was watered down somewhat in the discussions in Parliament. Some of the more draconian measures were actually removed from it after discussion. But I think it is certainly a signal that Ukraine is beginning to see the threat of a very significant incursion, potentially by Russian troops, as a very real threat now.
Do you think that it's possible that Russian troops are in some way already on the ground in parts of eastern Ukraine? And if not, what do we know about the Russian troop movements?
Well, Russian troops have been in eastern Ukraine for some 8 years on and off. They've just never admitted to it. What we're looking for, I suppose, really now is signs of a significant open crossing of the border, so an invasion of Ukraine that Russia would hold its hands up to and say was happening for all the reasons that it claims it needs to do that. We haven't seen that yet. So those tens of thousands of tanks and of personnel, Russian troops who Western intelligence agents have been talking about for months now, they are still on the borders. They're still very much close to Ukraine, but they haven't openly crossed the border at this point. But what I can tell you is I'm in Kramatorsk. Now, this is in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. It's not the area that is held by Russian-backed forces. It's a bit further away, but it is an area which those Russian-backed forces believe they have a right to. And we've been hearing more and more talk from those people and also from figures within Russia itself that the authorities in those regions, if I can call them that, believe that they need to take this territory. So they're talking about the regions that should be these recognised republics recognised by Russia, that they should be much bigger than they currently are. So lots of people here in this region are now really starting to get very nervous about what that actually means in terms of an extended military offensive, which would ultimately bring the fighting to right here where I am and where many, many thousands of Ukrainians live.
Sarah Rainsford in eastern Ukraine. Now let's hear views from Russia. And around 100 kilometres from the border with Ukraine is the city of Rostov-on-Don. Our correspondent Caroline Davies has been speaking to people there, including some who have crossed over from eastern Ukraine.
Young voices singing old army songs. Teenagers dressed in military-style uniform and school shoes parade through a public square in Rostov-on-Don, cocking their unloaded rifles as they guard the eternal flame to those lost in the Second World War. Today is a public holiday celebrating the armed forces. Among those laying red carnations here, there are different views about what's happening just across the border. Of course it's scary, Tatiana tells me, but what can we do? We can do nothing. Alexander served in the Soviet fleet. Ukraine will stop shelling, he says, and if they will not, as they said on TV, we'll send in troops. But President Putin is still keeping the world guessing. He hasn't confirmed if he sent Russian troops into Ukraine, nor ruled out diplomacy. Back near the border, people arriving from the separatist-held areas fill out paperwork. Many are emotional about President Putin's decision to recognise Donetsk and Luhansk as independent from Ukraine.
We hope that things will settle down and there is no more war.
Would you want to be part of Russia?
Of course, we would like it, because we love Russia.
Others are more conflicted.
We respect other countries and also respect Ukraine, because we used to live and study there, visited different cities, and have a lot of relatives from Ukraine. So we wouldn't like the situation to develop into a conflict.
The Russian president has promised that this is a step towards peace. Around the world, there are serious concerns. He has something else in mind. As Russia celebrates its military history, the rest of the world is keeping a close eye on what it does next.
That report from Caroline Davies. A BBC investigation has found children are exposed to grooming, sexually explicit material and even rape threats in some parts of the so-called metaverse. That's the name given to a range of games and experiences which can be accessed using virtual reality headsets. Angus Crawford has been finding out more. Parts of his report are disturbing.
Go on in.
Meet Jess. She's 25 and a BBC journalist. She's just put on a virtual reality headset. It looks like an oversized pair of white ski goggles.
People are around me and stuff. Oh my gosh, it's so weird.
She's pretending to be a child. First stop in the metaverse is an app called VR Chat. Some of the rooms look pretty innocent. A cafe, games, a virtual bobsleigh run. The age limit on VR Chat is 13, but there's pole dancing and strip clubs too.
Oh, hello, miss. We can hang out, watch a movie or something, nothing weird like that.
Isn't it school time right now?
Men chase a child, demanding she strip.
Oh my God.
Put your clothes back on, you're 14.
There are rooms with condoms and sex toys.
There are two people to the side of me now who are trying to get on top of each other. Okay, so there's like a group of people that are like simulating sex. I want to say there's like 5 of them. Oh my God.
And then Jess is assaulted.
He's shoving a beer ball up all of the female characters, like in their private areas.
What was that like?
Horrible. It was strange. It felt like it was happening to me. Stop it. Leave me alone. It's like the Wild West, and I wouldn't feel safe as a sibling of younger children having my siblings play on this.
Today, we're going to talk about the metaverse.
Mark Zuckerberg thinks the metaverse is the future of the internet, even rebranding Facebook as Meta, spending billions of dollars on the Quest headset, which dominates the market and for which you need a Facebook account. There are games and apps made by Meta itself, but also by other companies too, like VR Chat.
The next platform and medium will be even more immersive.
Of course, the metaverse doesn't actually exist yet. It's just the name given to a whole load of different games and virtual reality experiences you get to using VR headsets. The question is, can it be safe for children?
That was fun.
Good job, Mark.
Facebook promised us Disney levels of safety.
It seems to Andy Burrows from the children's charity the NSPCC that big tech is repeating the mistakes it made with the very first social media platforms.
What is driving products like this is profit over children's safety. Children are not safe on a product like this. This is a product that is dangerous by design because of oversight and neglect.
VR Chat says it's working hard to make itself a safe and welcoming place for everyone, Predatory and toxic behaviour has no place on the platform. Meta stresses it's not responsible for other companies' apps and says, "We provide tools that allow players to report and block users. We will continue to make improvements as we learn more about how people interact in these spaces." The so-called metaverse promises children extraordinary immersive experiences, but in its present form also seems to offer a very real risk of harm.
That report from Angus Crawford. Still to come in this podcast, we hear from South Korea, where the birth rate is at its lowest since records began. Hong Kong's top health official has said COVID restrictions may be tightened to try to contain a severe outbreak that has overwhelmed hospitals. Hong Kong is still wedded to its zero COVID strategy, despite recording more than 6,000 new infections every day. Critics of the policy say it's left the city vulnerable. The BBC's Danny Vincent has more from Hong Kong.
On the second floor of a subdivided apartment, Mrs. Choi and her young family are forced to live with COVID. The single mother and her infant children tested positive for COVID-19. Hong Kong officially has a zero COVID policy, but the latest outbreak is pushing the healthcare system close to breaking point. From across the road, at a socially distanced position, she speaks to us from her phone.
My breathing is difficult. It takes effort to breathe. I keep coughing intensely and my chest hurts. It makes it hard to breathe. I coughed up blood in the morning.
Homes in Hong Kong's subdivided apartment buildings are on average just 3 square metres in size. It's in these tiny living quarters where COVID spreads most easily.
My daughter today is reluctant to eat and even to talk.
Outside Hong Kong's public hospitals, positive COVID patients wait in beds outside the medical wards. The healthcare system is overwhelmed. 60% of Hong Kong's elderly are not vaccinated. China prides itself in strictly controlling the spread of the virus. In the mainland, authorities implement city-wide lockdowns. President Xi Jinping has told Hong Kong officials they must take all necessary measures to protect residents. But critics say following Beijing-style policies has left Hong Kong vulnerable.
My name is Junius Ho, a Legislative Council member in Hong Kong. It's not just a Xi Jinping decision, isn't it? It is a nationwide policy. If it is a policy adopted by the country, which is good for the well-being of the citizens, and I don't think that, it is open for anyone to say otherwise. So taking reference of the overseas failure example and experience, we stick with what we believe in, which is good for the well-being of the local citizen and also the residents of China.
Beijing has sent on-the-ground support to help control the outbreak. Hong Kong's medical experts say the city paid a high price for attempting to maintain zero COVID cases.
The BBC's Danny Vincent reporting. Chinese officials say they've arrested the husband of a woman who appeared in a social media video chained by the neck inside a rural shack. Officials have been under pressure to act, with extensive discussion of her case continuing on social media in China despite censorship. Our China media analyst Kerry Allen told me about the case.
It all started on a platform called Douyin, which is China's domestic version of TikTok. And it was filmed by a man in an area called Jiangsu province in eastern China. And he went into this outdoor rural hut and he found a woman with a chain around her neck, wearing very, very thin clothes. And bear in mind, it's still winter. She's clearly quite cold. And found out that she'd had 8 children. She seemed visibly distressed. He was asking her questions and she couldn't answer coherently. So arrangements were made to take her to hospital because there were suspicions that she might be a victim of human trafficking. I mean, this woman, to have a chain around her neck, it just absolutely horrified social media users. And very, very quickly, this was a big story on most Chinese social media platforms.
So there was an investigation, and now a number of people are facing charges. Tell us who and what charges they're facing.
There are 17 people who are being held accountable. This is what media is saying. And the party chief of Fengxian County, where this woman was found, has been removed from his post. He's probably the most senior official. Also, this woman, who's only been named as Yang, the man who she was living with, whose surname Dong, has been arrested on charges of abuse. So there's an investigation still going on there. A number of officials related to this case for just not realising that this was happening are those who are being held accountable. So that's what's coming out in the media at the moment.
And are people satisfied that justice has been done? Because obviously there was such a huge amount of uproar. Did they believe this has been properly investigated?
They don't at all. Today, for example, just seeing the preliminary report has come out, I've seen hundreds of thousands of comments on Sina Weibo. Normally a big story will have tens of thousands of comments. So this is a really, really major story. And there's huge public anger about this. And people feel that there needs to be a focus not just on this specific instance, but looking at other cases where this might be happening. I mean, Chinese people very strongly feel that women are increasingly being treated as second-class citizens in the country, and that there is this problem with human trafficking that needs to be further investigated. But also there's a lot of anger at how the media just didn't cover this in the first place.
Do we have any idea how Miss Yang is now and how she's been cared for?
We do, yes. There have been media showing her in a hospital being treated. There are reports that she suffers from schizophrenia, which is why she presumably couldn't answer questions when she was asked in this initial video. But that's all the information that's been given on her for now.
Kerry Allen. The World Food Programme has warned that 8 million Yemenis are at risk of losing all humanitarian aid next month because of a lack of funding. Yemen has been at war since 2014, when Houthi rebels seized control of large parts of the country. Despite the rebels and the government signing a power-sharing agreement to end the conflict in 2019, war continues. 130,000 people have been killed in the conflict, with tens of thousands more estimated to have died from a lack of food, health services or infrastructure. The head of the UN's World Food Programme, David Beasley, says multiple humanitarian crises around the world are threatening the aid effort in Yemen.
2 years ago, right before COVID hit, there was 135 million people marching towards starvation. When COVID hit, it created an economic ripple effect all around the world. And couple that with climate extremes and then extra conflict like you see in Ethiopia, and then Afghanistan, and of course now Ukraine's knocking on the door. We are now $9 billion short of what we need worldwide. We have a ring of fire literally around the world right now, and Yemen is right in the middle of it. We're feeding, as we speak, 13 million people. Out of that, 8 million are now at half rations because we don't have the money. And in fact, those 8 million will be cut to zero rations in a few weeks if we don't have a miracle very, very soon. A lot of donors are exhausted about Yemen, but at the same time, we can't turn our back on the innocent children here. It will only be 1,000 times worse if we don't come in and do what we need to do as we speak. We have a simple solution here. One, we need the money. And number two, end the war. We've got the systems in place to deliver the food. We do that. We know how to do that. We just need the money. It's just that simple. And if we don't get the money, people are going to die, and millions will.
David Beasley from the World Food Programme. Now, time was, not so many decades ago, a high birth rate was seen as a threat to the future of humanity and to individual nations' prosperity. Now, for many countries, the concerns focus on having a vibrant, economically productive population. And if one country represents the new demographic reality, it's South Korea, where fewer babies were born last year than at any time since records began. Here's our Asia-Pacific regional editor, Will Leonardo.
It's another year of sobering numbers from South Korea's statistics agency. The fertility rate, that's how many children on average a woman has during her lifetime, has fallen again to just 0.81. Last year's figures was the world's lowest, so it seems very likely that will be repeated again this year. And it's also notable how much lower it is than other countries that we often talk about having a demographic crisis, among them Japan, Spain, Russia. South Korea reported just 260,000 new births in 2021 for a population of over 50 million people. And meanwhile, another record, the highest number of deaths at 318,000. And therein lies the problem. South Korea's population is starting to decline. And with fewer working-age people, you've potentially got a slowing economy and a struggling healthcare system. So it's worrying for the government. They've been throwing money at the problem, giving handouts for each newborn. In the capital, Seoul, the authorities have announced $1,600 in vouchers for each child, and that's on top of national benefits. But analysts say there are systemic economic and societal issues at play in the decision not to start families. Economic security for many young South Koreans is elusive, exacerbated, of course, by the pandemic, which has also stopped people meeting. Meanwhile, house prices are soaring in the big cities, and analysts say it's not easy for couples to get a place of their own. Widening inequality is one of voters' key concerns ahead of presidential elections next month. And with the birth rate slowing for years, there's also just fewer young people. One way around that is mass immigration, and while there are more immigrants in South Korea than there were before, the numbers are still low compared to other developed countries.
Will Leonardo. Construction workers at a building site in northern Gaza have uncovered a 2,000-year-old Roman cemetery with more than 30 tombs. The discovery was made during building work, as Lipika Pelham reports.
The first-century tombs were unearthed near the town of Beit Lahia as work began on an Egyptian-funded project to rebuild the Gaza Strip after the last major hostilities with Israel in May. Gaza's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has sent a team of archaeologists to the site who are currently studying the gravestones and other artifacts. A ministry official said the discovery proved once again Gaza's importance as a seaport and a vital trading passage for many ancient civilizations.
The world number 3 men's tennis player Alexander Zverev has been thrown out of the Mexico Open for repeatedly smashing his racket into the umpire's chair. The German player launched his outburst after losing a doubles match in Acapulco and was eliminated from the tournament for unsportsmanlike conduct. Here's our tennis correspondent Russell Fuller.
Incensed by a line call which went against him and his partner Marcelo Melo in a decisive tiebreak, Alex Zverev swore at the umpire Alessandro Germani and accused him of destroying the whole match. One of his 4 menacing swipes at the chair nearly caught the umpire on the foot. Zverev says he has privately apologised to the official and said in a post on social media that it was difficult to put into words how much he regretted his behaviour, which he admits was unacceptable. The 24-year-old, who had been hoping to successfully defend his singles title, is likely to forfeit his prize money and receive an additional fine. And if the men's governing body deems this a major offence, Zverev could potentially be suspended from the tour. He is already being investigated by the ATP over allegations he was violent towards a former girlfriend, allegations which he denies.
That was Russell Fuller. And that's all from us for now, but there will be a new edition of the Global News Podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics we covered, send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. This edition was mixed by Johnny Hall and the producer was Stephanie Tillotson. The editor is Karen Martin. I'm Jonathan Savage. Until next time, goodbye.